Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session on unlocking the finance ecosystem for water security. Very exciting to see such a packed room and a lot of energy on this Monday of Stockholm Water Week, of World Water Week. My name is Yogita Mamsen. I'm the Global Solutions Manager at the World Bank for the water sector. I'm delighted to have you here in this session. It's going to be a very rich discussion. We have an amazing 2 sets of panels to discuss the financing ecosystem that is so much needed for water security. We know that by 2030, we need to mobilize up to 7 trillion for global water infrastructure. This is no small task, and it's going to take all innovation, ideas, and partnerships to bring this together. It's become clear, sadly through the news, the state of the water sector and the urgency to solve the problems. Water is a critical global resource, facing growing challenges from population growth, urbanization, and, as we're seeing in the media every day, climate change. So this type of discussion, this type of forum, and finding these solutions to bringing in the financing to put towards good programs and projects is going to be critical. Today's session is organized by the World Bank, the 2030 Water Resources Group, which is a multi-donor trust fund housed in the World Bank Group, which focuses on public and private partnerships, and will highlight successful public-private collaboration models and essential financing instruments for systematic change. We aim to foster an open dialogue on pathways to transform impact. So we really look forward to hearing from our panelists and getting some very rich ideas on solving these really challenging issues going forward. I'm going to introduce Deputy Minister David Malobo, the Deputy Minister of Water and Sanitation, the Government of South Africa. He has a rich experience starting off as a biochemist. He's been a member of parliament, has worked across the sectors, which is so critical for water because water touches every sector. And the Deputy Minister has worked on energy, and he grew up in the water and forestry sectors. So he really touches across all that we need to be working on. So I would like to introduce and ask the Minister to come up, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yogita, for the introductions, and receive our greetings from the South African government, led by His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa, and want to thank the World Bank for this session and the other partners that are here. Just a few pointers. We are convening at a time when there are geopolitical tensions. Most of the resources are being directed to a number of conflicts within the world. Military budgets are increasing. At the very same time, the issues of the advent of pandemics, many governments are shifting their resources to deal with the issues of pandemics like COVID-19. Then what is the end game? Most of the resources that should be put aside for the issues of achievement of Sustainable Development Goals, especially SDG 6, including in our own continent, Vision 2063, those resources, they are being shifted. And then we are correct to say there has been an underinvestment over a long period when it comes to water and water security. Globally, we are looking at around 7 trillion. In my own country, for us to be able to achieve the SDG goals, we are looking at 1 trillion, so that we can be able to do that. In other words, there are many competing needs, and many of the governments, especially in the developing world, they will not be in a position to achieve those particular imperatives. In other words, there is a backlog. We need to be able also to ensure that water remains on the main agenda, on the global affairs. Remember, last year, for the first time in nearly 50 years, we're being discussed in the UN. The G20 countries had a discussion. The risk that if you are not on the main table, you can become a menu on a table. Therefore, we should be able to push those particular issues. We also have to be able to allude that investment in water security is very essential for agriculture, food security as the population grows. For the economy to grow, you need energy. If you don't invest, especially in water, it can become an impediment around issues of an existential crisis. Therefore, many people around the world still don't have access to water. They run to more than 1 billion. A number of them don't have decent sanitation. Remember the importance of water during global COVID-19. If there was no investment in water, many people perished on the basis of issues of hygiene. Therefore, our message is that investment in water has a direct benefit to developmental goals, which is food and energy security, urban development, public health, and education. We therefore have a good case for water security investment because there is a pressure currently happening on the basis of climate change. In other words, some of the investments that we must promote must address investment in resilient systems, not only around carbon emission where there is a climate fund that is there. There must be the one that is related to water because there is a deterioration of water quality. We can be able to do reuse in terms of green energy, and blue energy is one of those that we must be able to promote. And at the very same time, the old methods that we're using around financing from public budgets, from the fiscus, including the issues of contribution from services, issues of tariffs, they remain an important one. We have to consolidate that one. Then we need to look at strategic investment, where you can be in a position to bring in the private sector and the public sector. In our own country, major bulk infrastructure projects, they have always been funded off budget. We are using our Trans-Caledon Tunnel Authority. We've built the Lesotho Highlands, which is now phase 1 and phase 2, so that there is water security within the region. But at the very same time, there are more opportunities that we could be able to do that. Therefore, there are also the issues of the implementation model, because some of the institutions, they do have challenges. The issues of concessions is one of the best mechanisms that governments can be in a position to implement in such a way that you will be able to take away the risk, but at the very same time, be able to provide that particular service. Therefore, we also have to look at the issues of private partnerships, where we can be in a position to use those particular models. But from a policy point of view, governments must be able to create the enabling conditions. Some of the legislation around the red tape, whether it is issues of licensing, the issues of permitting, and all these other issues are a problem that we should be in a position to actually remove. Therefore, we know, all of us, that the key actions, we must use the existing assets and the financing system, the enabling environment, I've spoken about it, the strategic investment planning to ensure resilient investment, especially around climate change conditions. In our own continent, drought is one of the prevalent issues. At the very same time, in our coastal shorelines, we have a lot of flooding that is happening. Even how we design the infrastructure, how should it become resilient, and how we should be in a position to bring about communities. As I conclude, we have to be able to say one of the issues around the development of taxonomies in terms of sustainable activities, the issues of the green bonds and the blue bonds, we need to discuss it. But we must tailor-make it because countries in the world who are not on the same positions. We don't want to be relying on donors, but we want to be relying on a concrete investment, because investment in humanity is an investment in water because it deals with some of those issues. Then the issue of the policy impetus will be able to listen here, and then we'll be in a position to say what policy initiatives we can be able to do. But in South Africa and in Africa, we are the growth point. Investing in Africa is investing in terms of global security and sustainability around water. Lastly, Nelson Mandela will have been correct when we see all the problems of the world that we see today, and many people feel that, you know what, we can't breathe. There are challenges. I want to quote him when I see men and women across the globe convened here, when he said, "I'm fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being an optimist is keeping one's head pointed towards the sun." one's foot moving forward. We should not be distracted. We should be resilient, and our focus must be towards the sun. We have to save humanity and planet Earth. Madiba continues and says, there were dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested, but I could not give myself up to despair. That way lies defeat and depth. In the global challenges we face now, an existential crisis for humanity, we cannot lose faith. This earth we've been bequeathed by our children. We are the trustees. We should pass it to the next generation. Therefore, investing in water security is about life, it's about restoration of dignity, and it's also about prosperity. In our hands, we have the capacity to make this a better world, not for ourselves, but for the next generation. I thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister, for those incredibly inspiring words, yourself demonstrating the importance of smart financing in the water sector for mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and those inspiring words from Mandela. Thank you so much. So now we're going to turn to the next part of this session. We are going to have a couple of panels, and they're going to be moderated by Rochi Kemka. Rochi is a senior private sector specialist in the 2030 Water Resources Group of the World Bank. So over to Rochi.
Thanks, Yogita. So just reminding everyone of the challenge again. So we require more than $1 trillion per year till 2030 to meet the SDGs. We're currently at around 164 billion in annual funding and spending. So there's quite a bit of gap to be met. And that's the task that we have for our panelists today to try and answer. How do we meet this gap and how do we get the water sector more on track towards achieving the SDGs? So we have two panels. The first one is going to outline financial institutions' perspectives. So how, from a financial institution standpoint, can we unlock financing for the sector? And then the second panel is going to touch on corporate and international organization perspectives. So without further ado, let me invite the first panel on stage. Mr. Satoshi Ishii, Director, Strategy and Partnerships, Asian Development Bank. Ms. Osha Knudsen-Sterte, Sustainable Finance Specialist with the SEB. Sergio Campos, Head of Water and Sanitation, Inter-American Development Bank. And Peter Zanapanos, Senior Water Engineer, Water Division, Environment and Natural Resources Department of the EIB. So, Satoshi, let me start with you. ADB is already doing quite a bit in the water sector, but the infrastructure financing needs are growing. So what kinds of innovative financing approaches is ADB looking at the moment?
Yeah, thank you very much. First, invite ADB to this panel, and then this is really important topic that the core of our operation. Maybe I just like to answer in maybe two parts. One is just how to mobilize the capitals. And for ADB, we actually, our board of directors approved our capital adequacy framework, which actually meaning that to enhance our, capacity to bring more money into the market. So basically, our sustainable level of lending portfolio increased from $26 billion to $36 billion. That's actually the entire, ADB operation. So it's actually 40% up. And then as far as water is concerned, we actually have around $3 to $4 billion additional every year. So that simply means that we're going to bring another 1 billion, 1.5 billion to the operation. And that level of the mobilizing funding is very, very important. I also like to add that this year annual meeting, our board of directors, actually also our shareholders agreed to put their money on the Asian Development Fund, which is our concessional window is a $5 billion US. Of course, some of those precious concessional money is going to be used for some certain windows, like SIDS countries, or the small island nation country, or conflict-affected country, or the climate change. But of course, many of those are related to the water. So those are the kind of additional funding that we can bring. Maybe I also would like to touch a little bit upon, your World Bank publication on the scaling up finance for water, which I like, the publication very much. It was very, very nicely summarizing the challenges to finance the water sector. And there are three parts, really the one is to government side to create an enabling environment and situation. Another one is how to, bring more private sector in terms of their technical capacity and knowledge and efficiency into the market. And then the third one is the finance. And the fourth one is actually the climate change. And for us, ADB, we have this sovereign public financing, the arms of the group, and then the public sector, private sector financing, which is a private sector financing arms, are sitting under the one roof. And we are kind of beefing up this collaboration. I think maybe the World Bank Group, you are doing the same. But, we have been already creating this joint sovereign to non-sovereign operation. And one of the example happening in Vietnam and also Indonesia, where we have a kind of water utility client who used to be our sovereign client for last 20 years. We actually started with, the sovereign guaranteed finance to the one of the departments, one of the province. But, as they go through our support through non-revenue water reduction, their operational efficiency, also increasing the capacity to provide water, now they were ready to take or ready to be our private sector finance client. So that kind of transition from passing to our public sector window to the private sector window is something that ADB would like to promote more. This actually needs a lot of thinking because the, private sector team are mainly bankers, and then they really need support from some of the sovereign team who, for doing a lot of policy dialogues or, discussion with the government in terms of tariff reforms and regulatory framework reforms. So those teams are really kind of, helping each other to create this. Of course, private sector team has to stretch a little bit. Okay, sorry, yeah, stretch a little bit to make this kind of transaction happen. But we see that those are the kind of the niche market that Asian Pacific, especially, we have a lot of utilities like that. So, we really want to promote that. Maybe those are kind of the way that we want to promote more money into it. Sorry, the last one is Indonesia case is, of course, source to tap initiative that we are promoting. So that apparently some of the part will be financed by the public sector. The utility part, water supply part can be, of course, the private sector can come in. So jointly, we can create the the finance flowing into the project. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Satoshi. And he was referring to a recent report also that the World Bank came out with, scaling up finance for water. So you're welcome to take a look at this. So you did mention, Satoshi, the more strategic use of concessional finance to crowd in the private sector. Let me transition over to Osa. Osa, what challenges, from a commercial financing standpoint, are you seeing in water? It's not all hunky-dory to say, okay, the supply of capital is available, but it's not necessarily being directed to water projects. So where's the holdup?
So I would say that we have two main challenges. One is water being a public good, and one being very regional specific. And the first challenge, water services have been a public concern. Investment decisions is made by a politician and is part of the public funding. And this means that the water sector has not really been exposed to commercial financing. So because of that, we have this mutual knowledge gap between the public and private sector that we need to bridge in order to get these investments to happen. And the public sector, as we also heard here, need to learn how to create this enabling environment to attract the private capital. And also, I think, distinguish what projects are actually suitable for private capital investment and not. Because regardless, a project needs to be able to show cash flows. And regardless of the societal benefits, if you have a pension fund investing in a water project, they have a fiduciary duty towards the people saving money in that pension fund. So the cash flows here is the key. And similarly, I mean, the private sector really needs to learn about water and how to make this proper risk-return assessment of water projects, and learn what are the material risks to the expected returns, and what would be the perceived risk that perhaps could be mitigated if consulting experts within engineering, environmental expertise, or Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for example. And I think the second challenge is on the regionalization, and that's two parts. So one, we have the nature-related hydrological and climate characteristics, and that poses different problems and different solutions. And part of it is related to policy and regulations. Who is taking the investment decisions and how? And who is deciding on the water tariffs, generating the potential cash flows in an investment? And how do the political stability looks like in that region? Because if attracting private capital, we need to be able to aggregate and scale investments. And here we see the need for common definitions and objective expertise in order to guide both the ones on the public side in need for investments, but also on the commercial investment side, on the banks and investors.
Thanks, Åsa. So we need enabling conditions. We need to understand where the revenues in the sector are coming from, where are the cash flows. Maybe I'm going to transition to Sergio. So if we want to get large-scale funding for water sector investments, what is IDB doing and what more can be done?
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much to the World Bank and to the Water Resources Group for inviting us to be part of this group and to hear what Latin America has to say. I echo the need to increase financing. In Latin America, we're investing close to 5 billion, and we should invest close to 15 billion to achieve the SDGs. And then I also echo the importance to create an ecosystem and to make, to de-risk in order to attract more private sector participation. We haven't had much trouble bringing private sector participation for agriculture and for energy, but for water and sanitation, we have. From the private investment that comes to Latin America, only 6% goes to the water and sanitation sector. In terms of our priorities to provide for the bank to support the region, we have 6 priorities. The 3 ones are specific. First one, water security. Latin American economy runs on water. We have 8% of the population, 1/3 of the freshwater resources. However, droughts and floods are affecting our water availability significantly, affecting not only economic growth, but the well-being of the population for the obvious reasons that we've seen through climate change these days. So that's one of our priorities, to ensure that the water availability is there in terms of drought and that we are able to manage the terrible floods. The second one is access, access for water and sanitation. 200 million people, 1/3 of the Latin American population, have a discontinuous service of potable water, and more than 2/3 don't have adequate sludge management, meaning that sewage is discharged raw into the waters, affecting the environment, the quality of the water, and people not having access to safe sanitation. And the third one is efficiency of the public utilities. 40 to 60% of water losses in the networks and accounted for water. Collection tariffs, as you mentioned, not being able to help public utilities to break even. So a lot of lack of innovation within the utilities to be efficient in the operation and maintenance of the infrastructure. And those 3 pillars are also complemented with innovation. Utilities are not prone to innovate, and innovate not only has to be technical or digital, it needs to be financial in governance and also social innovation. Then governance, the governance model that exists in the water and sanitation sector needs to change. We live in a new normal in which the decisions from the top down needs to be reversed and be more from the bottom up. Global solutions, I think, or we think, that should be addressed through local solutions. And finally, finance. We need not only finance to invest this large infrastructure that is needed, but we also need to ensure that the tariffs are there in order to secure the adequate operation and maintenance so that our future investments are not rehabilitation of infrastructure, but new developments and new projects.
Great, thanks, Sergio. So plug losses, create creditworthy utilities, enhance access. So coming to you, Peter, from EIB, hearing many of the challenges that the panelists so far have outlined, what is EIB's investment strategy in water?
Thank you very much. Nice to be here. So EIB is a long-term financing arm of the European Union. So that's why many of our strategic priorities are driven by the European Union. They are forming the policy. In terms of there is the underlying circumstances. We are a climate bank. We have the sustainability framework. We are very much in support of the providing investments for reaching SDG 6 goals. But more importantly, I think coming back to the subject of this meeting, then earlier this year we have a strategic reassessment of inside the bank. About our strategic priorities. We have now 8 core priorities, and most interestingly for water, we have an EIB has a water program which comes under priority 1, which is the consolidating our role as a climate bank. Now that's it sounds maybe not so important for the outside world, but inside water has always been everywhere, but now it has a clear focus. It has something like 8 action points of this program, and linking to the private sector involvement. For example, one action point is that we have to scale up our investments in resilience. Because it's especially inside the EU, because this is now becoming a lack of water inside the EU in many countries, becoming a blocking factor for, let's say, industrial development. These kind of projects tend to be big, tend to involve reuse, tend to involve, for example, desalination, which the bank is prepared to finance, and also quite naturally those bring in private partners, PPPs, for example. Also, this water program recognizes that our impact in terms of the multiplication. So let's say we finance around anywhere between 3.5–4 billion in the water sector annually. That usually generates around 4 times the investments. So it's a nice figure, but if you look at the global context, that's not sufficient. So this water program also recognizes that we have to do more in terms of attracting private capital, blending facilities. For example, that I'm going to come back to later, but we have developed structures for financing so-called second tier, third tier utilities, which would not have access to finance. We would like to scale up that. We also financing, it's maybe not well known that the group has another arm. It's called European Investment Fund, which on an annual basis invest in multi-sector funds around 17 billion euros. A part of it, around, I would say 10–15%, goes to water and environmental related projects. Here, I will explain later, but the bank takes kind of a minority position, and that quite often achieves a lot higher multiplication effect. I mean, I mentioned 3 to 4 for an average public loan. Here you can easily get into the 10–15 times multiplication. So a small investment from EIB can generate a huge capital inflow from private partners.
Thanks, Peter. So, as all the panelists outlined, the needs in the sector are massive, right? We're talking water security, resilience, access, climate change impacts, non-revenue water reduction, and the list goes on. We also know that public resources are going to be insufficient to meet the water challenge. So there is a need for partnerships and to get private capital to the table. So I'm going to ask another follow-on question to each of the panelists, but if you have any burning questions, keep them ready. We'll try and get a couple of questions from the audience at the end of this panel. So Satoshi, coming back to you, how can we think about strategic partnerships in the sector to try and address some of these issues?
Yeah, thank you very much. So strategic partner, of course, I'm the director of strategy and partnerships, so I have to really think about that. And then one thing I have to highlight is really the we have been receiving a lot of generous contribution from the government of Netherlands, Spain, and then also Austria, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I think those trust funds money are really, really immensely important for us to push this agenda forward. As we all know that, a lot of course, public money under the sovereign operation has been happening, but then we have to always bring those small concessional money distributed to the large, client to push more support in terms of, enhancing the credit worthiness of those utilities, also, promoting more resilient water project, through the nature-based solution, and then also maybe at the strategy level, we are working at the several utilities about the climate change, the vulnerability assessment, and also their strategy, so that as a utility they have to look at the future of the water resource, what the climate change would impact those resources, and what does that mean for those utilities in terms of their 10-year, 20-year business development or business strategy. So that's our really important the partnership. Another partnership maybe I can also highlight is that the partnership, like strategic partnership, something like, for example, K-Water for Asia Pacific is really, really instrumental. They have been providing a lot of support, capacity building support to our utilities, who is kind of graduating from public financing to the private financing. And then also they are also in the equity investor in terms of some of the water company that our private sector operation team has been accessing, addressing, or the providing finance as well. So we would like to continue forging those strategic partnership, not only at the government level, and then also those K-Water, PUB, Singapore, and then those the kind of top-notch water utilities in Asia Pacific, as well as those companies who is interested to invest. We continue creating those groups to work together. And of course, last but not least, I mean, we have this MDB, the water working group that we have been collaborating, horizontally to do that. I mean, one of the Vietnam transaction that I was introducing was actually done together with JICA, their the private sector operation arm. So I think those we have to join forces to kind of mitigate those risks and then provide more financing to the sector. Thank you.
Thanks, Satoshi. So indeed, the multilateral development banks are coming together to collaborate and increase investments in the sector. And I think the word from this panel so far has been the multiplier effect. How do we use every dollar multiple times, and how do we ensure that we create leverage on every dollar that's being invested in the sector? So coming to you, Osa, how is SEB trying to work with other stakeholders, partners, essentially to increase the impact of your investments?
So collaboration is really the core. SEB is a bank. We are financial experts, not water experts. So we really need to collaborate with the water experts so we can understand the risk-return profiles on the water projects in order to make it bankable. And I would like to give an example of collaboration. When SEB 15 years ago, together with the World Bank, developed the first green bond, this was initiated by a dialogue with institutional investors who wanted to invest in climate change mitigation. And in order to provide the objective expertise and comfort to the investors of the climate impact of that investments, they engaged and collaborated with the academic experts Cicero that provided the second party opinion. And these second-party opinions are now standards within the green bond market, and it's a great support both for the issuer creating the green bond framework and issuing the bond, and also for the investors buying these green bonds. And this experience really guides us now when we are engaging in water. So, I mean, we educate, we learn, we share information and explore collaborations with our clients and with water experts, with all our stakeholders. So with the corporate clients, for example, where are the risks and opportunities? If you are a water-dependent company, how can you innovate and come ahead of your peers? If you are providing technical solutions, what are the areas of expansion? Where can you grow? And what are the innovations? And with the investors, I mean, how are they exposed to water-related risks? And perhaps even more important in this context, what are the investment opportunities? And perhaps we can match investment needs with the investors wanting to invest. And I think this week is also a great example of learning, educating, sharing information, exploring collaborations, because here we have, in this room, we have collected governments, financial experts, MDBs, financial institutions, NGOs, and everyone. So, I mean, this is a very good example. And just on an end note, I mean, we at SEB has engaged in water for some time now. And as a proof of our dedication, this summer we have dedicated a team for 12 weeks to sit down in the cellar to really get our heads around how we can, together with our clients, engage in water. And this work is about to be finished now, so I just wanted to give you a heads up that we are scaling up, so stay tuned and please stay in contact.
Great. Thanks, Åsa. So clearly it takes a village to make this happen. But as a result of that, you get some interesting, innovative financing instruments, including capital markets instruments. So Sergio, how are you looking at private capital flowing through the systems of IDB, or rather through to projects on the ground?
As I said, one of the biggest challenges that we have in the sector, in the water sector, is to attract private sector capital. In terms of instrument, we continue pushing guarantees, political risk, as well as regulatory risk. We're doing a lot of regulatory reform projects in order to ensure that the rule of law can be implemented and then can be applied, and that there are very regulations in the country so that private sector can come with more security. That's sort of, those are two types of instruments. Then we're also lending in local currency, so that, because for the private sector, they have to borrow in dollars, but they have to collect in local currency. So we're pushing, or we're implementing local currency loans. And we're implementing result-based programs by which the private sector ejects their money. We pay them by results, and then we design metrics. And we've done that in sewage, for example, in Sao Paulo with a lot of success. That's proven been very good. So that's in terms of instruments. In terms of modalities, BOTs with long-term contracts for operation and maintenance. That's been very successful, particularly in wastewater treatment facilities. With Veolia, we worked a lot, and with other large private consortia. Technical assistance too, sort of like in a twinning arrangement type of thing, so that a private operator with long-term expertise in the sector can come and twin with a public utility. And then we have a project in Panama. It's a $250 million loan for reducing unaccounted for water, in which Veolia is right now operating, is doing the twinning arrangement. And we're also doing private initiatives. It's a facility by which a private sector can come and can say, I want to do this project, this is going to bring this benefits, and then it presented to the public sector, and the public sector then tenders for others. If there's a better tender, the better tender is awarded, but the private initiative gets refunded the pre-feasibility investments that they've done. They've done very successfully that in Peru and in Chile. And in terms of sort of promoting private sector investment for resilience, we have the water funds programs. We created the first water fund in Quito some 20 years ago. Today we have 26 water funds created in Latin America with more than 350 private investors. Those are beer companies, soft drink beverage companies, milk producing companies, and other investors. So they invest money in the water funds. They create a fund, which is a source of resources, but it's also a governance mechanism to fund nature-based solutions. So far, we able to collaborate with more than 350 private partners, 26 funds, and they've invested more than 200 million in nature-based solutions and solutions like that. So that's what we're pushing, and that's our contribution to that.
Thanks, Sergio. So a combination of upstream to downstream interventions ranging from reforms of the sector and technical assistance to PPPs, local currency financing, establishment of water funds. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, in essence, to solve this issue. Peter, last question on this panel to you. You spoke a bit about blended finance in your earlier response, but how exactly does that work, and what specifically are you doing in this space?
We have a toolbox of that we can sort of scale the solutions to the actual projects. I think the first thing is that it's a kind of a no-brainer, but I mean we finance only up to 50% usually of a project. So inside the EU, we always invite and welcome other commercial banks, and then our presence in any project is actually a kind of a de-risking signal for commercial banks, and they're quite happy to get involved. Sometimes they are too competitive, sometimes. Then I mentioned already that we are scaling up our efforts in resilience, so that means that we have done a lot of desalination projects, so we have an experience there in PPPs, but we wish to do more in terms of the reuse side. And then, if possible, we would like to move into PPPs in flood protection. That's an area we would like to explore, because currently there are none. But going on to the sort of the more riskier private sector investment, I mentioned that we have hydro bonds. This is a scheme that we developed. It's been very successful in Italy. The beauty of this scheme is that we can reach out to utilities that otherwise would not be able to obtain financing for their investment plans because of their ratings. Their own bonds are rated quite low by the market. So creating and investing a special purpose vehicle, and then the bank is investing in the sort of the first kind of junior tranche of the debt of this SPV. That usually signal is a market that other investors are welcome. Usually these SPVs are also rated because they are issuing a bond as well. And EIB's presence is actually elevating that rating, so making it attractive to private investors to come in. So here the leverage can be significantly higher, so we can reach easily 5 to anything between 5 to 10, the leverage ratio. Going further, even more riskier is that I mentioned that we have an arm, the European Investment Fund, is regularly investing multi-sector investment funds. These are specially created funds that invest in projects and then take on board funds from IFIs, but also from private investors. Here, I mean, we are in a lucky position that we got a huge backup by the EU, so we have guarantees. So using these guarantees, we are able to finance the first loss piece of these funds. And again, it has a positive effect because it signals to the other potential investors that they are kind of more protected. So they are coming at a senior debt positions. Which is sort of, and then for their investors, they are able to seek market returns while EIB is taking, again, the first loss, if there is any first loss. Usually there isn't. So that, unfortunately, the experience there is that still private investors, they looking at water investments as with lower returns, so that they're not always very attractive. So hopefully that will change. And also, it's we have to admit these are a lot of work. But EIB's experience is that we. Our presence, that because we do our technical diligence of the project pipeline, we vet the fund managers, the fund management, the members, their experience, their skills, so their kind of skin in the game effect. So if we do that and we say, well, we are willing to invest in those funds, that's a positive signal for the market, and usually those funds are able to attract additional funding through their sort of funding ecosystem, which we always check out as well. And then finally, it's just one which is a one-off. It's not a big one, but we, from time to time, we take direct equity positions as well in smaller companies, especially when it comes to innovative technologies. For example, in future desalination technologies, which can be game changers.
Great, thanks, Peter. So we have time for one quick question. Anyone in the audience with a question, if you can raise your hand, and if we can get a mic to this lady in the front. And I'll request the panelists to keep the response to under a minute, if possible.
Thank you, and I'll try and keep my question short. Barbara Schreiner from the Water Integrity Network. Thank you very much for the presentations. The question has two parts to it. The first is, as I understand, at the moment, the private sector investment is around 2.7% of finance coming into of money in the sector. What is the realistic projection of what that is likely to be able to go up to, everything going according to plan? How significant is it? And the second question for me is, we're seeing in developing countries at the moment, particularly in Africa, very high levels of indebtedness. How does that affect the ability to actually harness private finance?
Okay, so anyone on the panel who wants to answer that, to what level can we get private investment up, and how do we address debt sustainability issues, particularly in Africa?
For the first one, I can say I think it's low because the private sector sees the water investments kind of risky, especially when you come to the tariff structure. But it's difficult to say. But I would say there is a significant room for improvement. I cannot put a percentage there.
Yeah, I also cannot assign a specific percentage. But what I can say is that innovation is coming through the private sector. So and one of the biggest challenges that the sector have is to be more efficient. And in order to achieve the SDGs, we need to think faster and cheaper. And that can only be achieved through innovation. So their participation is welcome, not only for the money that they put, but for the innovations that they bring. And then there's not a problem in bringing private sector for energy. There's not a problem in bringing private sector for agriculture. The problem is attracting them to water and sanitation, which are very complex infrastructure type of project, because you have to bore underground the pipes, and then the returns are usually long-term. So de-risking is important. And I think that governments and multilaterals are going to have to continue funding. And again, just not to be repetitive, but they're welcome because of the innovation and the efficiency that they bring into the equation.
Great, thanks. And sorry, I have to cut off the question here, but please join me in thanking the first panel for a very rich conversation. And we're going to pick up that thread of innovation through the second panel. So if I can please request the panelists to come down, and I'll call on our second panel. So we have Anne Le Guenec, Senior Executive Vice President from Veolia Water Technologies and Solutions, Eliza Roberts, Global Water Lead from Microsoft, Braulio Moreira, Head of Resilient Solutions at the World Economic Forum, and Sophie Tremolet, Water Team Leader for the OECD Environment Directorate. So, Anne, I'm sure you were listening keenly to the first panel, and we ended off on this point around innovation. So could you speak a bit to how, when Veolia engages on projects on the ground, it brings in innovation and financing, and how do the two go together? Thanks.
Sure. Thank you so much for hosting this panel. That's key and typically at the core of Veolia's agenda. We operate on the 5 continents in almost every country, serving people, 113 people with drinking water, 103 million people over the world with sanitation. But yes, indeed, we've seen quite a lot of models. It's not a one-fits-all, as you said, but we've seen models that fit specific context everywhere. Maybe the first example that I can mention would be what we call the BOT, Build, Own, Operate and Transfer model, which allow the community not to put the capex up front, but to pay for the infrastructure through the tariff. And there to remind what Hossa said, we are a water expert, we are not a bank. So this is typically the type of model where we team up with partners so we can bring our expertise and we can have the financing coming on board along with the Public Water Authority. The example that is on top of my mind would be Samra in Jordan, that is listed in the World Bank report, where this facility treats the water from the biggest wastewater treatment plant in the country up to a level where we can irrigate the farms. So we irrigate thousands of farms, freeing up water for the equivalent of 2 million inhabitants. So that's typically a model that works pretty well. PPPs, you mentioned PPPs. We have one that I like very much in Windhoek in Namibia. I like it very much because that was a project pioneering in terms of reuse for drinking water, direct drinking water. So we're treating the water coming from the water treatment plant up to a level where people can drink it. So that's a PPP that we just renewed. That's now an O&M contract, but where we can supply drinking water whenever the inhabitants have shortage with the standard water management system. So PPPs is also a very good one. Concession, of course, are still working very well. Morocco is a place where we do have interesting concession for a very long time, since the beginning of the 2002 exactly. Morocco recently, we signed a contract where we are installing 384 kilometers of pressured pipe to irrigate also land instead of having just open canals discharging the water. And we monitor all that with our digital suite upgrade. So this is a system that is now completely monitored and that we can supervise at any time. So that's concession. And the last one, in 20 seconds. The last one is just ramping up, not fast enough in my views, but is interesting. That's the performance-based contracts, where we work on non-revenue waters, seeking for leaks and repairing them, of course, So we have an example in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, where we found already to date more than 2,400 leaks, repaired them, saving 1.2 million cubic meter of water. So that's under a performance-based contract.
Great, thanks, Anne. So lots of examples, different geographies. We just heard from a company that's operating in the water and wastewater business. I'm going to come to Eliza, who's from Microsoft, and some of us might ask, okay, what's Microsoft doing on water? I thought this was all technology and digital solutions. So Eliza, can you speak a bit to how you're helping invest in companies grow and supporting their solutions on water?
First of all, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me. And it's an honor to be on this majority female panel. I just want to acknowledge before I answer that when we were doing prep calls, there were some men who noticed that there weren't enough women. And they were really upset and they said, I'm going to step aside and I want my female counterparts to step up. And that just made me smile. And so I just want to acknowledge those men who stepped aside so women could speak today. So my name is Eliza Roberts. I'm the director of the water program at Microsoft. We have a goal to be water positive by 2030, and we set this in 2020. This goal, you may ask, what does water positive by 2030 mean? So for us, it's made up of 5 key pillars. The first is to reduce water use across our operations. The second is to replenish more than we consume across our global operations. The third is to provide people across the globe with access to clean water and sanitation services. The fourth is to engage in water policy. And last but not least, drive innovation. So why is Microsoft focusing on water in the first place? All companies need water. We need water to cool our data centers and to operate our buildings and campuses across the globe. And so it's a topic that's been very important to us for a number of years. So to your question, Ruchi, we fund a lot of water projects, primarily in the replenishment and access space. We fund a lot of projects historically that are focused on nature-based solutions with nonprofits all over the world. But more recently, we're looking to fund projects with private sector entities and with startups, where we can serve as a customer zero for these startups to help them scale up as we're looking to scale up this space and build supply of replenishment projects, both for ourselves, but also for the world. So I'll share 2 examples. The first one, well, first let's talk about a challenge. So many of you know about non-revenue water loss. For those of you who don't, water loss to leaks across the globe, the stat is roughly 30% of water that runs through our pipes is lost to leaks, 30%. That is just a staggering statistic, and in many places, as you know, it's much higher. So we're working to help solve this challenge by partnering with companies like Fido, Aganova, and Wavin to do projects where we're using AI and technology to identify leaks in municipal systems and repair those leaks and help save water and keep more water in for the communities that need it. So that's one example. The second example that I'll provide is about agriculture. We all know that roughly 70–80% of water is needed to grow the food that we eat across the globe. And so we're working to help support this as well, and we're partnering with a company called Calimo in the Maipo Basin in Chile to help them support farmers in being more efficient in the way that they grow food. And not only help them be more efficient by leveraging AI and technology, but providing them with a financial incentive to shift their practices as well. And Calimo, this is the last thing I say, I promise, is a really interesting example here. So we funded the Calimo project alongside Google, who I saw somewhere in this room. We funded the first Calimo replenishment project. It was brought to us by an organization called the Bonneville Environmental Foundation. They are a broker for the replenishment space. And this then helped to spur more companies to connect with Calimo and fund projects with Calimo, and now they have projects all over the world. And they recently announced a big investment, a big equity investment from Emerald Ventures Fund through their water fund to help support Calimo and help them grow further. So it's just an interesting example of how a small investment can then help scale and grow a company and a space faster.
Thanks, Eliza. So you're using digital solutions like AI to advance water security and also investing in companies that can deliver water efficiency on the ground. Great.
You're so good at summarizing everything we say in 2 words, and then I'm like, why did I even bother saying it in 4 minutes? We just need Rochi to do it for us, right?
It required the 4 minutes to get to the 10 seconds. Great. So, Braulio, the World Economic Forum, there's economics in it, but where does finance fit in?
Oh, that's a tricky one. So, the World Economic Forum, what we do is that we are the international organization for public-private collaboration. So, what we do is really to promote thought leadership. We support innovation and we incubate new ideas. So, in order to identify those new ideas, we work with a number of stakeholders. And the reason why financing is important for us is because we need to find new ways to do things that otherwise would be done on a business as usual. And we all know here that means lack of access for water. That means that not everyone is benefiting from the common goods. So what we do is really to create new partnerships. We develop new ideas. And for us, one of the best examples is 2030 Water Resources Group. We always, we show up in these conferences, we say, oh yeah, 2030 Water Resources Group is there. This was created in 2008, was launched at Davos, and 16 years later, we have an arm of the World Bank that has mobilized over $1 billion. This is huge, this is substantial, and this is happening because a number of private sector stakeholders stepped in and decided that it was time for the private sector to play a key role, and other important actors, such as the World Bank, decided to develop this idea. So our efforts are really focused on identifying those most critical issues and the emerging challenges, and we then try to create new ideas and develop those new ideas. So in the last few years, for example, we have been creating spaces to explore how new financing, how new funding can be mobilized. 4 years ago, we created a 50-liter home coalition in which private sector companies decided to explore how they can invest and co-invest and collaborate with public sector in order to promote water efficiency. The challenge is, of course, how you do that in the context of legitimacy and trust. Those are really important topics that need to be explored when we talk about financing. Money is there, yes, sure, we know that. But actually, how you mobilize this, how you make sure that the right partnerships are created is really the work that where we lean in. Also, we are trying to explore new ways in which financing and new sources of financing can be added into the mix. 2 years ago, we launched Giving to Amplify Earth Action, our Gaia project, which is about exploring the notion of 4P or PPPP, which is public-private philanthropic partnerships. We know that there is a gap in terms of de-risking investments that is required. We believe that philanthropic action can help addressing that gap. However, philanthropists and their funds have their own objectives. So how we can start aligning the priorities, how we can, and very importantly, because we're talking here about economics and financing, how we can start aligning the timelines and cash flows that each of those actors are interested in is really the challenge we address. So where do all these ideas come from? And this is, of course, an invitation to participate in the World Economic Forum. We have communities of leaders. Our community in water is Champions for Water, and also a global futures commissions that are created amongst the partners in the forum, and Microsoft is one of them. So.
Great, thanks, Braulio. So it's not just finance. It takes innovation, partnerships, trust building, thought leadership, and then the finance works. And economics, of course, going with your name. So Sophie, coming to you from the OECD. The OECD is doing quite a bit of work in terms of unlocking investments in the sector. Any recommendations or guidance that you can share with us on how to do this?
Yeah, maybe I'll share what we do as well, and then we can come to the recommendations. So the OECD, for some of you who don't know, is an international organization. It was set up in 1961. It brings together governments. So we work really very much on policies and help governments learn from each other in terms of what they can do across a whole range of economic policy domains, which include the environment and include water. So as a result of these positions, I mean, we have 38 member countries at the moment, which account for 46% of global GDP. So it's a high level, high income countries, and we are accepting every day, well, not every day, but new members. So Indonesia, Thailand, Argentina, Brazil have all applied to join the OECD. So when we accept new members, effectively what we do is we ensure that they follow good principles of policy on various domains. And we have this OECD recommendation on water, which effectively guides what should be done in the water sector, including on investment and placing water at the heart of economic policy making. So we really look at water, what can be done in the sector itself, but also making sure that broader economic policy making considers water challenges. And we do that through global fora, such as the G7, the G20, or also you may have heard that we're supporting the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, which will release its report in October 2024, and which is effectively will make recommendations to elevate water. So what we're doing concretely in finance is that we are effectively advising governments about how to change their policy framework so that it can attract greater investments to water, particularly on tariffs, on regulation, on defining. We've heard a lot about an enabling environment that is sufficiently attractive for all kinds of investments, public and private. We define tools, for example, to assess this enabling environment so that governments can assess themselves against their peers. So we have a scorecard to assess the enabling environment for water, which we are using in order to drive policy reform. We've done that in Armenia. We're currently doing it in Uzbekistan, where there is a strong drive to attract PPPs, but a lack of clarity about what is a PPP, what can it bring, is it money, is it expertise? We heard from the previous speakers that it could be a whole range of benefits. So we are also, you talked earlier, talked about the lack of understanding between public and private financiers. This has been identified for a long time and as a key challenge for attracting financing to water. So back in 2017, we set up a financing water roundtable jointly with the World Bank, with support of the government of Netherlands and the World Water Council, building on a long history of analytical work, data collection on the issue of water financing. So we bring these actors together to effectively discuss themes such as blended finance, PPPs, but also climate finance, how to grow climate finance, how to tackle the specific issues of agricultural water. And that is really a way of attracting more attention. So we did one on regional aspects of finance as well last year in Africa in November and in Abidjan, and we released today sort of recommendations based on that for growing Africa water flows and financing flows to the water sector, in which we formulated a number of recommendations, which I can go back to in the second part of our intervention.
Great, thanks, Sophie. So bringing stakeholders together through roundtables, I actually like the idea of the scorecard that you mentioned on the enabling environment. So do we have a clear understanding of where a particular economy stands with respect to creating the conditions for private capital to flow? And I'm going to come back to you. Obviously, as a private sector company, you have to look at whether or not a project is financially viable before you engage. So what specific criteria or indicators do you look at before you engage in a project?
Yeah, thank you. I like the question because, you know, technically speaking, everything is feasible, and we are innovating every day to make sure that technically speaking, we will be able to tackle the challenges of tomorrow. So any kind of water can be treated, any situation can be managed, but you're right, when we're talking about water management, we need to look at a holistic approach on the long term. And attracting experts and financing on the long term with the risk that we need to manage and mitigate is not an easy thing. When we look at a project at Veolia, of course, we look at the fundamentals, we look at the context, we look at the needs, we look at the growth demands, because again, we look on the long term, and we want to make sure that we will be able to answer the needs. We look at the approach, at the resources in terms of water and potential alternatives, because our purpose is to make sure that we preserve the resources as much as we can. So if there are alternatives where we can bring ideas and better solutions, definitely we will. Then we look at the governance, and Sergio mentioned for Latin America a few of them, but that's absolutely key. The Public Water Authority needs to be perfectly independent from the elected government, so there is stability on the long term. And needs to be independent in terms of bookkeeping, external audits. So we make sure that we work as a company because we need to manage cash flows, as has been said earlier. Compliance, transparent processes in terms of purchasing are absolutely key to us, so we make sure that we will be able to do our job properly. And of course, coming to the technical ways of operating, we'll look at the resources, but in terms of human resources and expertise that we will be able to bring on board. And we love to be able to really bring on board our expertise and experience on projects. We, again, love the performance-based contract, whatever the format of it. But what we do at Veolia is proof, not promises. So we want to be able to demonstrate that what we build works.
Thanks a lot, Anne. And you spoke about a number of things, but I'm just going to pick up on one word, which is governance. I don't think we heard it in the conversation so far, and there was a lot of discussion around, public-private. Laurely also mentioned philanthropic, but maybe that's one element to bring the pieces together. Eliza, in addition to supporting, digital solutions for water management, Microsoft is also investing in different companies and also putting its own equity to see some of these solutions grow. Can you talk a bit to that?
Sure. So we have two different funding mechanisms for water projects at Microsoft. The first is a water fee that I meant to mention in my earlier remarks, and it ultimately is funded by companies across the different businesses at Microsoft based on their portion of the water they consume. So they pay into this fund, and then that's the money that my team uses to fund water projects across the globe. So there's the water fee, and then we also have the Climate Innovation Fund, which is a $1 billion investment initiative that is helping to deploy and accelerate climate technologies and solutions across the globe. It is very much focused on climate, and water is a part of that. And so I'll give one example of a water-related investment that's been made through the Climate Innovation Fund, and there have been a few. So some of you may be familiar with Water Equity. It's a sister organization to water.org. And they have launched a number of different funds, including their most recent fund, which is a Water and Climate Resilience Fund to invest in water infrastructure in the Global South with a focus on marginalized communities that really need that support. And so Microsoft has made a $25 million anchor investment in that fund, along with a number of other companies. That fund is actually going to be increasing. So for folks who are interested, or for some banks who might be interested in helping to de-risk corporate investments, it's an interesting model there to consider. But just to bring this to light, I shared a lot of words. What does this mean? We don't have specific examples of what this private equity fund is going to fund yet that I can share. But a potential example is, as many of you know, roughly 80% of wastewater returns to surface water systems untreated. And so one potential solution is, if this fund can provide investment into a local water utility to help them build out a wastewater treatment plant, but not do it for communities that don't need that support, but really focus on marginalized communities and help prevent that sewage from going directly into fresh waterways. So that's the equity example. And then I'll just share one quick example about a fund, if I have time. I'm looking at Richie really quick. Quick. Okay. So in addition to building out projects that we can fund directly to help meet our goals, we're also working to help build collaboration and scale for our customers, for our other partners across the globe. And so one example of that is, I mentioned a project with Fido where we're looking to tackle water loss from leak detection through our replenishment portfolio. We're now looking to partner with Fido and with Water Foundry and PepsiCo and other companies who are joining to build a water fund in the Colorado River Basin in the western US. And many of you know the Colorado River Basin. It's one of the most highly stressed, highly worked basins in the globe, and it provides water access to over 40 million people. And so this fund will focus on not just non-revenue water loss, but also other solutions linked to agriculture that ultimately leverage technology to solve water solutions. And it's called Water United, and you'll be hearing more about it. If you're intrigued to learn more or you're looking for projects to fund in the Colorado River Basin, I encourage you to check it out. And now I'm done, I promise.
Thanks, Eliza. So interesting that you have an internal fund where all the companies are contributing, and then you're also making external investments, equity investments and such in other entities. And you also spoke about the 1 billion Climate Innovation Fund, which is not small. So great to see Microsoft's ambition on this. Braulio, what kind of financing strategies is specifically the forum supporting, in addition to some of the pieces that you mentioned already?
Thank you. So the topic in which we are really, really interested at the moment is about exploring the gap that exists between project identification and the initial steps in project financing. So we know that many organizations are ready for, to finance shovel-ready projects. We all know that, but we have identified that there is a lack of support and investment in the initial steps in identifying those projects. So how can an indigenous community define and articulate their project at a level in which it can be, explored with a funding agency, with an implementing agency? That gap is something that we are really interested in, and of course, because there is the cost recovery is a challenge that needs to be explored further, and for us, what matters is that financing needs to be fit for purpose. We need to recognize, again, that many lenders have different objectives, which is fine, because they play specific roles in societies, et cetera, but not all of them have the same objectives, not all of them have the same needs in terms of timelines. That is really what we want to explore. For us, the topic we're exploring at this point is blended finance. Now, blended finance is something that can take many shapes. The fundfromwater.org is a really, really good example. The example I was mentioning about our Gaia initiative that actually is about mobilizing philanthropic funds in order to then attract private funding as well as governmental funding as well. So what are these different ways in which we can support a diversity of needs? Because the governance, especially in water, is not the same. Even across the same countries, we can find different ways of water governance. We need to really start adapting financing in many cases. And finally, for us, is also about supporting mechanisms that can enable the full flow of financing through for example, the existence of what it's called specialized lending vehicles. So vehicles that can help de-risking projects or de-risking specific elements and help articulating those lending mechanisms in a way that it's more appropriate for the concept. So bottom line for us, what matters is really to start identifying the next generation of unconventional and bold partnerships. What are those partnerships? Who are the partners that can play a role, and who's ready to act differently, to have a very different timeline? And what is the reason, and the key reason and the key challenge, and I'm going to conclude with this, is because scale is an issue. Whilst we might be finding very good examples of funds, private sector companies that are really ready to do that differently, at the moment, in most basins that represent 2, 3, up to 5% of the water that is consumed. If we don't get to 30%, in which all practices are changing, the performance of that water basin is going to remain pretty much the same. So that's really the reason why we are trying to explore new ways. And it's just fantastic to have many partners that are sitting in this room, including the World Bank, in these discussions, because we need to make that change, we need to achieve scale.
Thanks, Braulio. So we need to match the demand and supply of finance to achieve scale. And definitely no easy task, but a lot of organizations are working in this space. And that's my segue to OECD and Sophie. So could you describe a bit more, what specifically OECD is doing to mobilize more resources for the sector?
Yes, thank you. So you mentioned the need for information. I think in terms of data, in terms of matching demand and supply, we need to get better at describing what the financing needs are for water, because there's a lot of numbers floating around, but there's not much clarity on both at the global level, but also at the level of individual countries. So that's one area where we want to focus more efforts, establishing a global financing water observatory so that we can bring the different data sets that exist. For example, many of you might be aware of the OECD DAC database, which for a very long time has been a very reliable and trusted source of data and information on aid to the water sector. But as we know, aid to the water sector is not the main part of funding. It should be the complementary funding, and it's aid including ODA, the grant element, but also ODF, so it would include other financial flows mobilized in terms of repayable financing, both public and private. So effectively that getting to know better, to understand better what is being spent, what needs to be spent. We've done that work, for example, with the European Union, because we need to understand that funding needs are very significant as well in developed countries for renewing the infrastructure for meeting new norms. So there we estimated that 289 billion would be necessary for 28 countries by 2030, in addition to the 100 billion which are already being spent. So this type of analysis can be replicated in other geographies working in partnership with other organizations. Then we very demand-led. So we have a series of policy dialogues with countries in which we engage on topics that they want to specifically address. So one topic we're seeing really emerging right now, or sort of consistently being asked for, is that of regulation. There is a strong need to strengthen regulatory mechanisms, including in Asia, for example. We're working with Philippines, with Indonesia on this topic. We're about to start working with Senegal, which just created a high authority for regulation of the water sector. So there's a need to clarify how regulation by agency can be combined with regulation by contract, how benchmarking can be delivered, how tariffs can be increased to cost recovery level. Our advice on that would be usually to keep subsidies more to social policies, but that's subsidies instead of tariff subsidies. But we also recognize that there's a need for strong public spending on the sector, so setting up agencies or funds that can deliver these subsidies in a targeted manner, and in the meantime scaling out harmful subsidies, particularly in the agricultural sector. So we're working with governments across the range of these policy instruments. And then the last thing I will say, I know you're looking at me, is a lot of demand is also coming for innovative sources of funding. So one mechanism we're working on, for example, is that of land value capture. which has been very much used in other sectors across the OECD countries, but is not been very much used for water. So these are mechanisms to capture a percentage of the increment in the value of land when there is public investments going to flood risk reduction or to any improvement in the value of land. So we're doing this work in Indonesia, for example, where there's very strong urbanization and a need to increase water investments, particularly against climate risks. So this is a range of things we're doing. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Sophie, for outlining the breadth of activity that's taking place. We have time for one question. Any really tough question? This is your last chance to ask the panel. Anyone in the room with a question? Or we answered everything? Online question, sure.
Panel members involved in developing water credits markets similar to carbon markets.
Any work happening on the water credit side?
The work that we're doing at Microsoft and that a number of other companies that have water positive and replenishment targets are doing is ultimately a version of credits, right? It's water credits. It's just not necessarily called that. It's called replenish. But for any of these water projects, there's a range of project types that you can fund, from nature-based solutions like rainwater harvesting or watershed restoration to projects that are more focused on helping a building or community be more efficient with their water use. There's all a volumetric benefit, volumetric water benefit, VWB, that you can count towards your replenishment target. And that is how companies are making progress against their replenishment target. So right now that is the corporate equivalent, although I'm always reluctant to compare anything in water directly to carbon, because I think that can be a little dangerous, but I'll let others jump in if they have other things to add here.
Yeah, maybe just to say, at the OECD, we have this database that brings together all the economic instruments. That's a key focus of our work, is looking at what economic instruments, including credits or sort of biodiversity credits, water credits, all types of environmental credits are in place, because there is a lot of experience with those. So I encourage you to look at that. Is the PINE database. It's been going for several decades, and we're growing its coverage to include different sort of environmental domains. In water is one, fresh, in pollution and water access is one. So there is definitely experience that can be drawn upon, and this is something that we will look to focus on more in our next work program, looking at what can be deployed for freshwater restoration in particular, which is a key area of need of funding and which has been underfunded up to this point. Nature-based solutions and the like, which gets corporate contributions, but where funding needs can be much increased given the contribution they can make to resilience.
Well, thanks for the responses. With that, we come to the end of the second panel. I'd like to thank all the panelists for their insightful comments. So I have the daunting task of trying to summarize and close this session. I won't build on everything that has been said, but let me make 3 points. In terms of unlocking financing for the water sector, we at the World Bank believe the first step of that, and this was re-emphasized by many of the interventions that we heard today, is creating the enabling conditions for more capital to flow. So it requires policy reform, it requires fixing institutions, it requires regulatory strengthening, it requires a focus around governance, making sure that existing resources allocated to the sector are used more strategically to crowd in private capital and other sources of financing, and used more efficiently. So that's sort of the first element of financing as we see it. The second is there is also a lot of scope for professionalization of the sector. We heard numbers in terms of high levels of non-revenue water losses, low levels of access, issues in terms of governance, management of water, resilience. So there is scope for improving the technical and operating efficiency of the sector and improving the financial viability of projects. And the first two elements go hand in hand. Creating the enabling conditions and improving efficiency are very much linked. And pricing and tariff policies also play a key role in that respect. And then the third element is looking at financing itself. And the kinds of financing solutions vary, right? So we heard examples of blended finance, PPPs and concessions, where private sector is not only bringing in innovation and expertise, but is also bringing capital on the table. We heard about new kinds of green bonds and other solutions that can be unlocked for the sector. But it does require a combination of stakeholders to come together. So public, private, communities. I didn't hear that word, correct me if I'm wrong. Community is a key element of the stakeholders that are needed. Philanthropic capital, as someone pointed out. So it does take everyone sitting around the same table and looking at how the demand of supply and supply of capital can be combined really to address water issues on the ground. Finance is a means to an end. It's not a goal in itself. But looking at the gap that we have on investments, we're not going to be able to meet our water goals unless we solve the financing challenge. So with that, let me thank you all for joining this session. And again, once again, our panelists for their insightful comments and inputs. Thank you.